Hello and welcome to the Action for Independence show. This is the Action for Independence show, the show that brings on topical people and topical items for discussion. Today, you can see we've got David Thompson, interim leader of Action for Independence, and Martin Keatings. Martin, how are you doing?
Not bad. Same as usual. To be expected for being locked in the house since March.
Aye, exactly. And David, how are you?
I'm good. I just keeping busy between one thing and another. But, it's good.
Good. Right. Okay. Well, David, you had a big event last week in the Court of Sessions. Would you like to tell us a wee bit about how you're getting on with that? No, David. Sorry, Martin. Martin. Getting the words mixed up. I'm looking at Martin and saying David. Sorry, Martin.
That's all right. Don't worry. We've got the green light from Lady Carmichael to take the court case to the substantial hearing to actually start arguing the substantive matters at play, with regards to the constitutional situation in Section 30. Up until now, it's been stall after stall after stall and roadblock after roadblock. It's been literally like trying to walk through thick custard since we first began this process. Unfortunately, at the behest of the Scottish Government and the Lord Advocate, who you would have thought would have been fighting for the enhancement in the retention and the overall constitutionality of the Scottish Parliament being able to legislate on such matters, but nothing but apathy. And I do have to say that it's left me more than disappointed in them. Would be probably an understatement at this point.
Really? Well, unbelievable. David, where's AFI in this situation with Section 30? What does AFI think of Section 30?
We've been considering a route map, if you like, to independence, and can I commend Martin for all his efforts and all his work in pushing the court case through. I always have mixed views about courts because they can be extremely expensive and and create all sorts of difficulty. But if he gets the answer he's looking for, then it certainly clears one way, absolutely, clearly, in a legal sense. So it allows folk then to say, no, we can do this. Conversely, of course, if the case doesn't succeed, it closes off a door. But I suppose either way, there's more clarity. So every success, Martin, and the rest of your case, and we know it's a long slog and it must be frustrating for you at times. What we're doing in AFI at the moment, we're still putting various building blocks in place where we're looking at the route map. We really are keen to promote the idea that, and we've been doing this for many months, and others are now coming on board, the SNP included, that next year's election is the independence election. There's a number of different ways that we can ensure that it takes on a greater prominence than just looking for a majority of Indie supporting MSPs for a referendum. There are various other ways that we can force the hand of Westminster, and we're looking at obviously a clear majority of Indie supporting MSPs. That's an absolute reinforcement of the current mandate and an absolute reinforcement of a mandate for a referendum as soon as possible. But we're also considering, and we haven't quite finalised this yet, we will do in the next week or so, whether in fact, if we got a majority, a 2/3 majority of Indie supporting MSPs and a majority of votes in the constituencies and the regions, should that actually constitute a mandate, not for a referendum, but for independence itself? And that's what we are considering at the moment in AFI, and we will make our view on that known publicly in the next week or two once we finalise our position on that.
Yeah, exactly. Martin, for a lot of people like me, right, I could consider myself a kind of a layman compared to yourself, who's in these high courts and all the rest of it, or courts of session, doing all these important things. So from my perspective, it's like it's getting the law on side, but it's not necessarily the case that we need the law on side if the law is not really our law to be on side with, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, that's one of the misconceptions about what we're actually doing in the court. I'll just go back for a minute just to something David said there about if we lose this case, it'll close off an avenue. That's not actually 100% true. And the reason I say that is because any bill that goes through the Scottish Parliament for a referendum that doesn't have a Section 30 order would require to be tested anyway. So all we're really having just now is the fight that the Scottish National Party would have to have if they tried to bring a bill forward, including the draft bill that they've actually mentioned at the moment. All we're having is the fight now rather than them having it later on. One of the important things to mention is that Section 30, the reason it's called a Section 30 order is because of Section 30 of the Scotland Act 1998. And that basically deals with the temporary transfer of powers to Holyrood that it wouldn't normally be allowed to legislate on. So in 2014, first we had the Edinburgh Agreement, which was a pre-agreement between both governments on what the Section 30 order would look like. Then it moved to the Section 30, which is called an Order in Council, which temporarily devolved the powers that it wouldn't normally legislate on. Now, that was a conscious decision by the SNP to acquiesce then. But even Alex Salmond at the time was arguing that, listen, we actually don't need a Section 30 order. We're just doing this so there's mutual agreement on both sides. Yeah. What's never mentioned with the entire everything surrounding Section 30, whether it's competent or it's not, is actually the next section. And the next section is Section 31. And what that actually dictates is that a person will, the person that brings forward a bill actually has to make a declaration that it's legally competent to pass that bill. The next part of that section is that the presiding officer has to make a declaration that the bill being progressed is within the competency of the Scottish Parliament. Now, if you remember, we had the Continuity Bill, and the Continuity Bill, its entire purpose was to try and retain the laws of the EU in Scottish law so that Scottish couldn't reserve it, try and pull those powers away from the Scottish Parliament. And it was undermined because the presiding officer couldn't make that declaration under Section 31 of the Scotland Act. He wasn't sure if it was legally competent or not. And that then ended up in the initiation of court action. And while that court action was ongoing, the UK government were a bunch of, shall we say, sleek-it wee sods. And basically what they did was they then passed laws at Westminster to undermine that bill, thereby making it incompetent.
Yeah.
Now, what we've done by moving the goalpost, by having the argument now, is it competent or is it not competent for the Scottish Parliament to actually hold a referendum? By having that argument now, if we win, we hand a bazooka to the SNP so they can go and say, without any doubt whatsoever, this is a score. It's legally competent for us to hold a referendum with or without your consent. And the SNP actually don't need to use that. They can say, mutually agree with us, Section 30, and then we'll not have to use this. But if you don't, we have this power. And that's the important thing about this case. It's not just about, can you have do you need a Section 30 or do you not need a Section 30? It's all about establishing the competency of any bill or any other avenue that's not a Section 30. So Angus and Chris McElhaney's Plan B requires to establish that it's definitely competent or it'd be challenged by the UK government. Any route the AFI considers that's without consent, referendum by plebiscite, using the election or any other form, again, the bills for that would have to be legally competent and would need to establish that, which is exactly the fight we're having right at the minute. And that's that is a really important thing. But we're not going to the Court of Session and saying, can you tell us, is this legally competent? Is it not? What we're going to them with is a full legal opinion that says it is competent for the Scottish Parliament under the law now to call a referendum tomorrow if it so desires. Prove us wrong.
Yeah.
And then the UK government then responds and they have to prove us wrong. Now, the big thing that happened last week wasn't just that we got permission to go straight into court to argue the substantive arguments. For the first time since this all began, I was finally able to tell everybody that in actual fact, the UK government, the Scottish government, who have now withdrawn, and the Lord Advocate representing the Scottish Parliament, not one of them have progressed any argument against the opinion that we made that we created back in January. The only thing that we are challenged on is whether or not it is competent for the 7,000 people that have brought this case to actually have standing in front of the court to argue these matters. And if the electorate can't challenge, then the governments that are supposed to represent them in court, then we really do have a serious issue in terms of access to justice. So if we get past that hurdle, there's really no arguments that have been advanced by the UK government. What I published last week is the closed record. That is it. That is the arguments, period. And if you look at them, it's just dismiss it. He doesn't have title and standing. Dismiss it for it's academic. Of course, we know it's not academic because now there's a draft bill. It's premature. Well, no, it's not, because that draft bill is supposed to be published in March, etc., etc. So these are all standard responses to try and get something kicked out. What the UK government wanted to do, the UK government and the Lord Advocate wanted to do, was to split away each one of these ones. It's academic. It's premature, and have each of them argued at different hearings between now and it being argued. That's what the fight was all about. So more money, more time, because obviously 3 hearings cost more than 1. We argued we want everything argued together on a 2-day hearing. We won, and we got the green light, so there's no more roadblocks. But that's just some really serious matters I needed to clarify, because there's a lot of different interpretations of what this is all about out there. And it's really sort of confusing the matter. But the long and the short of it is, we're not asking, we're telling them it's competent for the Scottish Parliament to legislate on this. Prove us wrong.
Yeah. David, do you want to say
something? I was just going to say that I think that's one of the difficulties that you face, is the kind of complexity of it, because unless folk are fairly au fait with these kind of procedures, even folk that do have a bit of knowledge, struggle sometimes to grasp what the arguments are all about. So that's obviously one of the biggest challenges for you, I think, Martin. And
I would say about Section 30, in fact, that has literally been the entire thing about Section 30. The entire situation, it's not a legal loophole or gap. What it is deliberate ambiguity, because it serves the UK government to make this sort of thing completely ambiguous, because it creates this impression in the back of the minds of people. If I go to the ballot and vote in this, will this be legal? Will this be lawful, or will this not be lawful? And that would in itself turn a lot of people off from voting. Clarify it. No more excuses.
Ambiguity, Martin, you're absolutely right. It's a classic from our adversaries. Is ambiguity is a very important weapon for them, but more close to home. You mentioned bazooka. You've got a bazooka to hand to give to the SNP, if I can mention the SNP. Again, as a layman, my impression is that there's people in the SNP that don't want to take that bazooka off you and use it. Have you got any idea why they would be reluctant to take your gift?
I have several ideas of what it could be, and none of them logical with regards to the legal side of things. There are a number of things I have seen that are still confidential in the case, that makes me think that there's really 2 issues. One, they don't want anybody playing in their sandpit, and I just have to put that out there because unfortunately it is a possibility. 2 is that they didn't take the case. The Scottish government didn't take the case seriously in the start. They thought, it'll get tossed out, or it won't happen, or we won't get to this stage. So they decided, in their infinite wisdom, we'll just let the Lord Advocate, he's arguing on behalf of the Scottish Parliament, we'll just let him deal with it because he's a member of the Scottish Cabinet as well. And then certain items were put in to the legal arguments, which were rather derogatory towards the electorate, shall we say. mentions of it's not the right of the pursuer, which in this case is 7,000 people in the electorate, to stand in the shoes of parliamentarians. I then got words about 3 days before its publishing asking for comment about the Times had managed to obtain a copy of those arguments. Then around about the same time we'd started the second fundraiser, and the second fundraiser was gaining pace. And it was definitely going to hit its target. So I said on Twitter, I'm going ahead. Next day I started getting panicked emails from the Scottish Government legal director asking, are you proceeding? Are you proceeding? Because they thought we'd run, right, you've run out of cash, that's it, you're screwed. And at that point, I think that the Scottish Government read what the Lord Advocate had written, crapped themselves with regards to what was going to happen in terms of the fallout from that. Then the Times came along, and the Times came along as well and said, by the way, we're publishing a story about exactly this thing you've said. And that all in combination, they just panicked and dropped it.
Can I maybe ask a wee question, Martin? Of yours?
Yeah.
I'm just going through my mind, I'm thinking from the pure politics of this. In terms of where you're going now and timescales and so on, because we're just 6 months out from the May election, unless it's postponed, of course, which is, I suppose, a possibility because of COVID. How do the court timescales fit in, as you see it, with the timescales in terms of the election and the campaign that will start in earnest once we get past the new year?
Well, but at the moment, we're targeting the second week of January is when the substantive hearing will be held, and it usually only takes a couple of weeks for something this substantive, for a ruling from the Lord Ordinary, which in this case will probably be Lady Carmichael. Of course, then you do have. If we win or lose, there's probably going to be an appeal on either side. I would hope that the UK government would see sense at that point if we were to win. But this is the UK government under Boris Johnson, so nothing much makes sense about what they do. So, we'll see what happens from that. But we're looking towards a conclusion before the election.
Yeah, sorry for butting in. Would you be kind of confident that a final decision, hopefully a winning one for yourself and your team, would be available or made prior to the completion of party manifestos, for instance?
We are party manifestos would really be March. You're talking sort of March, maybe April, start of April. Yeah. We're hoping so. I'm not keen to commit 100% on a date because, as we know, the hearing we had last week should have happened in August. So I'm hopeful that we'll hit that target certainly before the election. But in terms of giving a 100% guarantee, I would never do that purely on the basis that it wouldn't be right to. It's too in flux at the moment. But we're certainly on the right course heading for it to happen before the election. But I'm not going to make a solid commitment on that because I don't do that. So.
Okay, well, let's move on, shall we? Martin, we'll maybe come back to that towards the end of our session. There's been big news in America that maybe we could talk about, and maybe David, you could give us your thoughts on what AFI thinks about it. Martin, you, the bigger picture. We've got a different president in America. They're going to be looking at things differently. What's going to change as far as we're concerned? What's going to change in Scotland? Are we going to... there's lots of interest out there in newspapers. Oh, Scotland, have we looked at it? We'll get independence. The Americans are going to support our independence movement and all the rest of it. What do you think, David?
Well, it's all very interesting. We haven't actually discussed this in any detail in AFI, but just from where I'm sitting and my own view on this is that it'll obviously have an impact. But my mind immediately goes back to the first independence referendum in 2014. And just prior to that, the SNP changed their long-standing policy to not be members of NATO, to actually join NATO. And it was Angus Robertson that pushed that through really hard. I was amongst those MSPs who opposed that. And at the party conference in 2013, it just barely scraped through. And our policy of not being members of NATO, held for decades, forever, it was overturned. My worry at that time was that it would make it much more difficult for us to get rid of the nuclear weapons if we are members of NATO than it would if we were not members of NATO. But the other thing, one of the arguments that was used at that time to convince people that this would be a good idea, that we should actually join NATO on our independence, was that it was more likely, and not so much assurances had been given, but there were nods and winks that this would actually positively influence the American president, Obama, at the time in terms of supporting Scotland's move for independence. As it turned out, he did not support Scotland's move for independence, and he made the normal diplomatic sort of speech, which was a very strong hint that you're better sticking together. I think he might have been in France at the time, but it was prior to the referendum. So whatever people thought was going to happen, whatever they'd been promised over a meal was going to happen, didn't happen. So I would not be willing, to put my coat on Biden's America coming down one way or another. There's an awful lot of water to go under the bridge. We just have to keep on working to show the good positive case for independence, and hope that folk like him and others will see the sense of that eventually.
Yeah, there's a lot about him being Irish. He's 5'8", he says, Irish, and the impression is that because of that, because he's quite proud of his Irish ancestry, he has a better grasp perhaps than Obama did of the politics in this part of the world, and maybe politically he's more inclined to like the Irish and therefore dislike the British, if you like. Although we can get into all sorts of mess if we go down that road in Scotland. But Martin, what do you think about the American situation?
Well, in terms of America itself, I think that definitely things are going to start getting a lot better for them in the way that things have been going for them over the last sort of 4 years with Trump. But in terms of the situation here, I think probably one of the first things that is going to be an issue for America is going to be the Good Friday Agreement. In fact, Biden has already stated that there will be no free trade agreement between the United States and the UK unless the Good Friday Agreement is upheld and is protected. Certainly, the Tories got their crushing defeat the other day in the Houses of Lords with regards to the bill that effectively breaks the law when it comes to the provisions of the EU, withdrawal agreement. But that's really means nothing, because all that's going to happen now is it's going to go straight back to the Commons. Commons will override, bill will go through because Boris Johnson has such a big majority. So I think that's going to be the hot ticket issue with regards to the United States, is going to be the Good Friday Agreement. On the plus side of that, in finding a solution for to get over this hump with regards to the Good Friday Agreement, that would most likely lay out quite a decent plan in terms of the relationship between Scotland and England, so Scotland and the remaining United Kingdom, with regards to trade, in the because obviously if we're re-entering the EU bloc. So the same sort of model that would be used for the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland would effectively be the same for Scotland and England. So that enablement of trade could very much be pushed as a result of pressure by the United States in terms of the Good Friday, try to protect the Good Friday Agreement. It would certainly give us another clear pathway in terms of the trade that we would have with the United Kingdom, just like Ireland and Northern Ireland. And we could argue for exactly the same reasons, because there's a lot of supporters, obviously during the Troubles, there's a lot of it, crossover between Scotland and Ireland at that time, certainly in terms of family histories and things like that. So, you know, there's going to be a lot of pressure from Scotland as well with regards to protecting the Good Friday Agreement as well. So very much in that up in the air, but I do think it might actually have an intrinsic benefit to Scotland in the long run. So
for sure. Okay. I think that's does for today, gentlemen. That's been a very great listening to you. Very informative stuff. So that's the end of today's AFI Show. If you've been listening, thank you very much for listening. Please share and share and share again. And I look forward to seeing you again at the next AFI Show. Thanks very much. Bye-bye. Thank you, David. Thank you, Mike Martin. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye now. Bye.